We trained as community organizers, and the goal for a community organizer is to go into a community, listen to its needs, and respond in partnership with the community, especially with community leaders, those who really care about what's going on in their community, because they're the ones with the fire in their bellies to keep a project going. Our job is to identify the leaders. We help somewhat with finances, and we've been coaching with the idea of longer term thinking, the idea of growing a project, reinvesting. Are there spin-off projects? If a project's going really well, like a cooey farm, maybe another community is interested in buying some of the best breeders and they start another cooey farm in their own community. But the aims are generally education. In that category, we're both right now teaching English classes, and we from time to time just offer an English class when there's interest. We've taught first aid, we've taught nutrition, and then the other type of project in general that we like to invest in, they're really meant to boost the quality of life and bring in some income. That explains the 9 greenhouses. They're meant to generate funds. They're usually built in partnership with schools because schools have public land, and you don't run into a problem of somebody volunteering a piece of their land and then changing their mind 3 years later saying, I want it back. So schools are a good place for us to build greenhouses. Usually, it's not a requirement, but usually the students get involved in growing produce, so that might become a job for them in the future. The school usually sells some of the produce, and we buy it here in the restaurant to make pizzas, tomato, lettuce, spinach, broccoli, etc. And then the rest they sell in the street. And also, a lot of the schools use some of that produce in making the children's lunches. So it's a project, the greenhouses are a project that work on a lot of different levels, and we love those projects for that reason, because it helps a lot of people in a lot of different ways. The projects that we saw were really gift projects. Americans had funded a huge building in Peru, for example.
And just gave all the money for it.
And the local people were offended because there's this huge 3-story building in the middle of their very poor neighborhood. And what the local people concluded was that the people who built this thing must be incredibly rich. And what do they want from us? And why would they build that in our neighborhood? So there's still animosity 8-9 years later from the people who live in that neighborhood, and the building remains unused. And there were plans for other similar buildings. And our very strong reaction was, handouts are not good. Even if it's medicine, there were a number of medical teams who came to try to help through that same organization. But it's sort of like, okay, if you test for high blood pressure and you tell someone, you're on the brink of having a heart attack, I'm going back to the States now, bye. Or, here's 30 days worth of medicine.
Yeah,
what good does that do? I mean,
yeah.
Haven't you effectively added more anxiety and no real help by doing that? If someone does have high blood pressure, instead of giving medicine, give them some education on how they can treat it with exercise and dietary changes.
So it's more like help to self-help you're occupied with.
Yes.
Well, and we have built some buildings. We've built some social service centers in
But
little
only
towns.
when communities wanted them.
Only when they approach us about it, number one. Number two, they finance most of it.
Mm-hmm.
We help with the financing. That's about it. And we're partnering with them. We're not telling them what to do. We're not building something. They design it. They build it with their technique, with their materials.
Lots of donated materials from the community, donated labor.
And therefore, like when it's done, when you have a roofing party day, and that roof is going on that building, and the whole community is there putting the roof on the building, and it's the end of the day, they own that building.
Yeah.
They own it with their hearts.
Yeah.
And
even
they
children.
chayar it. Chayar is a word meaning bless it, but it's an indigenous type of blessing. They put flowers on it, reeds from the lake around the building. They spray it with alcohol. They shoot off fireworks, and it's basically like giving the building to Pachamama. It's, it's a very indigenous type of.
Thanking the earth for providing
blessing.
the building materials. But even the children feel invested in that building. That's the way to build a building, where the people will take care of it.
Yeah,
And
they're
if
not
it
gonna
needs a
let it-
repair, they'll do it because it's their building. It wasn't just plunked down in their community by strangers who then left.
Yeah.
That's an important difference to us. When we came up with the idea of opening a little restaurant, one, to support ourselves, because remember we came as volunteers, and then when we decided to stay longer, we realized we're going to need some kind of an income. But we hit on this idea of a restaurant because we both like baking and cooking. He's really great at pizzas. I'm pretty good at baking things.
Well, with so many kids, we cook
All the time. But we figured we could support ourselves and help support these projects, and at the same time be a little bit less dependent on donors in the U.S. And as it turns out, with the success of this restaurant and bake shop, we're now providing about half of our budget. But I should also mention that local people come up with, originally it was 25% of the startup costs for projects came from the local folks, so that they would have personal investment. And it makes a person think carefully before they spend their own money to invest in a project. So they're induced to think, can I myself make this project work? I'm spending my own money. Nowadays, communities they're really recognizing the idea of partnered investment in projects, and they recognize the importance of the local people being invested. Well, it's a second marriage for us, and between us we raised 5 teenagers, and when the youngest of those grew up and became independent and moved out of the house, that coincided with both of us feeling pretty disenchanted with our jobs, and we met each other doing community service work. And so we had in mind for a long time that later in life we would do some kind of volunteer work together. And we thought, well, maybe we should just do this now while we're young enough to make it happen, and who knows how long you get to live. So we took 3 training programs to work as community organizers. Anyhow, one of those trainers pulled us aside and asked if we were serious about a long-term commitment, would we be interested in working in South America near Lake Titicaca. And at first I said no, because I was turned off by the machismo culture. And my husband, he was a construction engineer in the US, so he would be useful anywhere, I figured. And my job in the States had been writing and editing, and I just had this vision of being his useless woman, which would have been horrible for me. So at first we said no, but then we just had a momentous change of heart. And one of us said to the other, well, what do you think? How are you feeling about this? And the other one said, good. You? Yeah, good. You want to do it? So we called back to our contacts and said, we're in. We live in a lower part of Copacabana, and there the house we're staying in receives water maybe for 2 hours in the morning. But this, where we are now, is the highest part of town, and so there is no water in this part of town. So every day we carry up here to the shop maybe 60 to 80 liters of water from home in order to be able to wash dishes on our backs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes if we're really low on water, we might hire a taxi, but we do that maybe once a month or so. Yeah. And then the other big issue in our lives is buying cooking gas. Homes, individual families are restricted to, 3 garafas? One garafa.
Every 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks. We have a right to buy, well, if there's gas available, families can buy 1 garafa of gas. Businesses that use gas, as we do, to cook food, we're entitled to up to 3. And if there happens to be extra, we can buy extra. And normally we buy 4 and sometimes 5 garafas, but we are able to do that because we make pizzas for the directivo, the neighborhood
of the zona.
The neighborhood
We also
council.
help sponsor the soccer team. Every little zona, every neighborhood has a soccer team. So we help buy the uniforms every year. So then when it comes time to buy gas, you can buy more than 3.
Well, now we're sort of bracing for culture shock when we go back to the U.S. because we're used to cold tap water that isn't potable. We're used to 220 volt shower heads. 3 times while I've been showering here, the shower head caught fire. So I'm standing there naked and wet, yelling for my husband, Jeff!
I like that it's more relational. In the United States, it tends to be more money focused and individual. People hold to themselves, and I mean, we can't walk the 9 blocks from home to here without having to shake hands, hug, or at least say hello to a few dozen people. And if you walk by somebody because you're concentrating and you don't notice them, they're going to ask you, "What's wrong? What's wrong? You know, what did I do?"
Or they'll be offended.
Or they'll be offended, but in a playful way. But
yeah.
It's just so relational here. I mean, the kids in our neighborhood call us Tio and Tia, and
what does it mean?
Aunt and uncle, and you're just expected to be part of the community too. There are obligatory work days and meetings, and if there are issues in the neighborhood, meetings are called and everybody gets together to figure it out.
We live much closer to the earth. In Chicago, where we came from, you can buy strawberries and cherries and lemons and limes and oranges any time of the year you want them. And maybe they've shipped 3,000 miles from Mexico, but if an American wants strawberries in January, that American can have them. Here, I love that fruits are only available in season. Cherries, for example, are only in season for 10 days to 2 weeks. So I make cherry tarts, and it's a big event in my life. I love it. And they're special still. I like that it's a simpler life. Sometimes that's frustrating, but...
In which way?
For example, we have power outages maybe once a month, and they last for a whole day. Occasionally they've lasted for 3 or 4 or 5 days, and everyone just copes with that. Whereas where we came from, that would be just a huge crisis, just a vast calamity. And mind you, people have refrigeration in the States much more so than we do here. It's a problem for people locally who sell ice cream, but most of us, we just cope with it. You go to bed early, you get up earlier, and that's it. So it's, I don't know, it reminds me, I am reminded many times a day how many luxuries we have in the Western world that we just take for granted, like potable water is always available. And in the US, we have it hot or cold, whatever you like, or anything in between. That's all under control. And here, we feel lucky to have water. We feel lucky to have electricity. We feel lucky to have clean air. And that's an issue in bigger cities. There is pollution here. But we feel sort of like this must be what the life was like in the US maybe 150 years ago. Another example of that is when families have babies here, they don't name the baby, usually for at least 6 months, sometimes a year, because Bolivia has one of the highest infant mortality rates in the world, and they don't want to waste the name. It was like that in the US 150 years ago. Mm-hmm.
What is your motivation for keep going?
Well, I guess, it's in everything balances out, and it's on the positive side. The positives outweigh the negatives. The fact that there's no garbage pickup, and sometimes you go without water and electric and that, and it's hard to get to and from places at times, and there are blockades and strikes, and but at the same time, the quality of life can outweigh all of that. It just, like she said, living closer to the earth.
It's also,
you're eating fresher foods, you're learning to do, okay, every once in a while we go to La Paz and buy things, and every once in a while you'll see an American product that we used to like there, and we'll buy it, and we'll bring it back here, like a jar of salsa or something, and you try it, and you're like, ooh, that's all chemicals.
Loaded with chemicals.
Yeah. And you can taste it.
Yeah.
And it's because, for years you're just making, if you need something, you make it yourself. So I think living closer to the earth is something that's a positive. The relationships are a positive. Not commuting into office jobs and sitting in an office, meeting people from all over the world almost every day.
Yeah.
Learning to speak, a new language in Spanish. I mean, right now we're fluent in Spanish, and we're learning a little bit of Aymara, a 5,000-year-old language.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of pluses.
And it's gratifying to be able to be a problem solver in a place that has such limited resources. You've come to feel like, oh, this is another challenge. How am I gonna solve the fact that every time it rains, there's a river of water and mud that flows through our house? He solved that problem. That in itself becomes kind of rewarding, because you realize I don't need nearly as much as I thought I used to need. I can solve my problems more simply and more creatively. We see a lot of parallels with parenting, some of the best parallels. And if we feel as if we've done our job well here, we are needed less and less, and that's where I see the parallel with parenting. If you do your job well as a parent, you shouldn't need to be in your offspring's lives all the time. And we sort of see these projects and the people working on these projects are about at that stage. They're at adulthood. We're seeing other groups, other communities imitating the greenhouses, for example. They're building exactly the same size, shape, same materials. That says they recognize value, and we're delighted to have our ideas propagated and shared.
What have you learned from them?
What have we learned from them? Well, we've had some thorny lessons here that we needed to have. Early on, good example, there was a meeting and we were talking about building a community resource center. And of course, as Americans, we show up with our calendars and our pens and our calculators, and we wanted to schedule everything. Okay, so when the walls are up, we're going to need more cement for the floor, and we have to have roofing material in just at about the same time, because the roof has to go up right after that. And we wanted the names of people who were going to do this work and cost estimates, and tensions were escalating and escalating at this meeting, and we thought we were being taken advantage of because they were giving us unreasonably low prices. It's a trick that happens a lot in construction to make the funding entity decide, oh yeah, I'm going to be behind this, sure, and then the prices incrementally climb up. And so we were feeling a lot of anxiety around that, like, oh man, here we are trying to give to these people and they're taking advantage of us. So that made us angry. And then our wanting to schedule everything and chop, everything organized and planned and ironed out, and commitments from people, that made them angry. So the tension is just rising, and people are starting to put their hands on the table and then their fists on the table, and they're backing away from the table. And finally they said, do you two people ever leave any room in your lives for God to act? And we were like, yeah, as Americans, we kind of try not to do that. We try to control everything. We try to be God. And it was really humbling for us. That was very humbling, and we learned a lot from that. Just to dial back the cultural things that we bring with us, where time is so critical.
One of the coolest things is that we had to learn to like it, is that when you go out into the countryside for a meeting, you're liable to spend a lot of time sitting around just chatting about family, about whatever things, eating some food, mostly potatoes, and just really sharing with people. And to local folks here, that's what's important. And we had to learn that is important. It's important to just don't always be working, and don't push yourself to accomplish goals every day, but sometimes just, talking with people and sharing time with people and a meal with people, that's the important thing. Mm-hmm. So we did learn that, not to say, okay, we're going to go to Wakuyo, but we need to be, back on the road to Copacabana at 1:30 in punto. And, they look at you like, why? Relax a while, here, have a refresco, have some potatoes, and
enjoying life.
Enjoying life. And that's one of the things
soccer.
that keeps us going here too, is that, we push ourselves hard with the restaurant.
Yeah.
But we're not on a 9-to-5 job schedule Monday through Friday.
Not rigid.
And it's not rigid. We're not catching the 6:35 commuter train in the morning. into the city, we're coming up to work when we get household chores done or when we want to. And if you run into a neighbor who wants to talk to you for 5 or 10 minutes, that's important to do. More important than opening the shop on time.
We try to be conscientious about not burning out. It's hard work running a restaurant. We have a half-time helper, and it's just the two of us doing all the baking, all the cleaning, all the shopping, customer interaction, answering questions, and there are many for travelers. There's always issues about altitude sickness, what to do in La Paz, et cetera, et cetera. They always have questions. So we're on our feet 12 hours a day. And if we happen to wake up and just feel, oh man, I think I've got the flu, we're pretty peaceful now about just deciding we're just not going to open the restaurant. We're going to try to not burn ourselves out. And that's something I think we've learned locally, because in our jobs, such as they were in the U.S., if we woke up not feeling well, we always felt like, I have to get on that train and get to my office. I have to do the job today. And that's partly cultural. It's partly economy. Where Americans, when we were living in the States, we all felt afraid that we could lose our jobs, and then that would be a financial disaster. Here, the economy is so tiny and so feeble that people don't really have jobs. They generally sell things here, whether it's selling Kleenexes or grapes or shoes or what have you, but it's an informal economy here, and we've kind of learned to be a little bit informal in how we relate to our work. If something can't happen today, we wait for tomorrow or next week, and we're a lot more peaceful with that than we used to be. That was a lesson learned.